So we want to get started. Thank you very much all for coming. The Honorable Ambassador of Austria, Mr. Nicholas Lutz, am I pronouncing it right? The Director of the Ministry of Science of Israel, Hilla, Haddad, Chmelnik, thank you. The Vice President of Tel Aviv University, Dan Peer, the Dean of Engineering, Noam Elias, and of course our keynote speaker today, Wolfgang Lutz. Many wonderful hosts and guests. The way we will proceed now is first I'll make a small gesture to Moti. I will ask both Gansen and Albert. Where's Albert? Please come to the podium. Moti, my predecessor in this role from the University of Beersheba, Moti Hershkovich. When we were there, they presented me with this certificate. I said, no way, you have to give it yourself to Moti. He has worked so hard for this collaboration for so many years. So I brought them over, and I'm now going to present this certificate of.
This is when people serve on our council and they make the kind of contribution we did when he was at IIASA. We present them as a certificate to appoint them as a IIASA honorary scholar on behalf of the council of IIASA. So Moti, from our side, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's okay. It's okay. You won't. Okay, you went, yeah. Okay, sorry. This is just to honor Moti's contributions on behalf of the IIASA Council and to hand over to him the certificate that appoints him as a IIASA honorary scholar. Moti, thank you for your efforts, and we really appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate that as well. Thank you. Thank you. Can I say two words?
Yes,
go ahead.
Moti, please.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure that, I'm in the honor to have this but I want to make sure that everybody here understands that nothing would have happened without Shmuel Amnonson. He's sitting right there. He is responsible. He started it up. He pushed it. Without him pushing it all the way through, it would never happen. It would never materialize. And whatever accomplishments were here, he had a major contribution. Thank you, Shmuel.
Thank you.
Thank you. I even threatened him that if he leaves, I leave with him together. So I stayed because he stayed. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyway, so I'd like to wish you success in endeavor. You have a great organization, okay? And I want to wish Itai success.
Thank you very
and I
much.
hope you'll do a great job, you know. All right. Thank you.
Big,
Sure.
big.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Big shoes to step in. I apologize that Tamar Dayan, the woman who runs this incredible museum, will not be able to speak today because she has become sick. I will invite now the Vice President for Research of Tel Aviv University to say some words. Dan, please. Dan Peer, please.
Okay, so on behalf of Tel Aviv University, and I'm also the chairman of the Forum of the Israeli Universities and Research Institute, Vice President on Vera. This is actually what Tamar wrote. So I'm going to be her voice. Good evening, everyone, esteemed visitors, important delegation, and friends. We are really happy that this event is taking place, the IIASA Israel Symposium on Sustainability Pathways Empowered by Systems Analysis, and even happier that it opens here at the Steinhardt Museum of Natural History, Tel Aviv University. IIASA's website states that It is an international research institute that advances system analysis and applies its research methods to identify policy solutions to reduce human footprints, enhance the resilience of natural and socioeconomic systems, and help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. These are certainly the 21st century's greatest challenges worldwide. As scientists, we have been aware for at least a couple of decades now that the fourfold growth in the global human population in the past century, an unprecedented occurrence, the sevenfold increase in the average per capita GDP, and the dramatic development in use of synthetic chemicals and plastics have a huge toll on the ecosystem and consequently on human health and well-being, and on global natural capital, to the extent that it can no longer be taken for granted that biodiversity, our life support system, will be able to produce and provide the so-called ecosystem services upon which we are dependent to the next generations. In the past few years, the understanding is shared by growing chunks of public and decision makers. Unprecedented floods and huge fires, deadly heat waves, and major blows to global food production. Literally biblical level floods and catastrophic increases in extreme event and spread of zoonotic diseases. All these were expected scientifically, yet their magnitude is greater even than anticipated. It is truly mind-blowing. Health, livelihood, food systems, social and international stability are already impacted, and in turn impact the environment. We are incredibly aware of the complex interconnected between diversity, open landscapes, urban and rural planning, the atmosphere, agriculture production, and land management. Our dietary choices, specifically mine, renewable energy technologies, international trade, and general consumption patterns, including fashion. These are huge social challenges. We all face those challenges as scientists and as members of the global population, and this is the time to address them head on, not a moment too soon. They are all incredibly complex, involve biological systems, earth system, economic systems, and social systems. The cost of indecision or wrong decisions at local and international scales can be devastating. Yet the economic implications of addressing them effectively are so major that they are often daunting to decision makers. As we see time and again in the climate arena, yet changes are, of course, inevitable. And we must develop science-based tools for decision makers to help make them for the benefit of society at large. Therefore, the input of data-based, cutting-edge scientific research using innovative models is a crucial part of the path forward, and a multidisciplinary approach is a key to success and relevance to the research. In my own scientific approach, Tamar's scientific approach, at the interface of biodiversity, agriculture, landscape, ecology, and conservation, clearly IIASA is involved, and often in leadership position in key European and international board-ranging cooperative projects of huge significance to the future ecological, agriculture, economic, and social landscape. So I'm sure that the relevant scientific community in Israel stands to benefit much from cooperation with IIASA scientists, and at the same time that we also have much to contribute. I hope tomorrow's sessions on the key environmental issues, demography, water, energy, transportation, biodiversity, and agriculture will contribute to developing such cooperative research in the different topics chosen. The challenges facing Israel, and particularly complex as a small, heavily populated country, a land of immigration with a strong development ethos, with regional instability, and at a climate change hotspot, we have already reached the 1.5 degree threshold. So we definitely should invest our efforts exactly in the issues that IIASA focuses on. And a word about this evening's venue. The Steinhardt Museum, Israel National Center for Biodiversity Studies, is a national research infrastructure that, while university-based, was established to meet the needs of the State of Israel in a national museum of natural history. And as such, we have the privilege to work very closely with ministries of environmental protection, of agriculture, and of rural development, of science and technology, with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, with the Forest Service, with Israel planning authorities, with the land authorities, with regional councils, and with other organizations. This is an exciting place to be in a times of global change, when cooperation and multidisciplinary sciences are truly important for achieving sustainable development goals. The museum records patterns and changes in biodiversity in aquatic systems of Israel, as an example, at different temporal and spatial scales and resolutions, maps, spatial patterns with remote sensing combined by the groundbreaking botanical and landscape service, and carries out a wide range of basic, applied and applied policy relevant studies of local and aquatic biodiversity, including studies of policy, economy, and regulation. As a national research infrastructure, we strive to meet the needs in our field of all scientists, and many are indeed involved in the museum's core activities, and now also in the new Israel Center for Citizen Science in the museum, which will not only engage the public in the scientific exploration, but will also produce masses of new data to be analyzed and used as a basis for modeling. Naturally, we look forward to scientific cooperation with IIASA on all those topics of mutual concerns. So we wish IIASA a happy 50th birthday and many fruitful and happy returns. And all of us, this symposium will be strong and effective kickoff for much cooperation research on a major challenging facing us all. Good evening.
Thank you, Dan and or Tamar. I'm not quite sure who to thank for that. I think that, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Dan has to run for, yes. I think that it is important to mention that capturing of this institute, the museum, is a major capture for IIASA, because this is a real national center for the study of biodiversity and its applications to agriculture and well-being. And it has large number of excellent scholars working here. And so this is a key to our future collaboration. And Tamar is a force to reckon with. Even when she's very sick, her voice speaks to us from downstairs throat. So it just shows you how powerful she is. Before we conclude this part of the evening and move on to the keynote speech by Wolfgang Lutz, I'd like to invite the head of the Ministry of Sciences in Israel, Hilla Haddad. Thank you.
It's the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being here. The IIASA Director General. Tel Aviv University representative, thank you for your host. Of course, Itai, and I would like to join Shmuel and thank you, Moti, for your job till now. And I will join you and thank again to Shmuel Abramson, which had a big role in joining this institute and continue our representative there. So, as you all know, IIASA is considered as a global leader and the global gold standard in sustainability. And one of its main goals are to promote the implementation of solutions to reduce humanity carbon footprint and they improve the ability of ecological and economic system to withstand the climate change. In my ministry, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology, in the last year, we're working a lot with the other ministries in order to bring the Israeli innovation power, the startup nation power, in order to contribute to the world effort to the climate change. And working on that, the part of IIASA, of being a member state in IIASA, took a big part of it. Israel, as I said, considered as an R&D powerhouse in these areas of climate tech and the climate research and the human capital and the entrepreneurial spirit. We think that this is what we can contribute to the world, because as Tamar said in another voice, we are a small country. Our footprint, our carbon footprint is small in order that we are a small one, but we think that the part of Israel in the world challenge will be to innovate and to bring innovation and solutions to the world as a whole. In the eyes of my ministry, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology, there is nothing more important than the ability to connect new ideas and brain power with the capabilities to promote policy and innovative policy, like through IIASA and what you are doing in this institution. We see as a top priority to increase the number of people working, people working from the government, from the different universities in Israel, working on the areas that IIASA is focused on and taking part of the important jobs that you do in IIASA. We just passed a new government resolution in July, jointly with the 4 other ministries, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Environmental Protection, the Ministry of Prime Minister, and the Budget Ministry, that says that we will be part of IIASA for the next 5 years, to come, because we think it's very important that we will continue and bolster the Israeli membership, and that more and more Israeli scientists and more governmental policymakers will be exposed to what IIASA is doing. From my perspective, a success will be a policy decisions that made by different ministries, not just the ministries that I mentioned, because today almost all the Israeli ministries doing something that relies to the subjects that IIASA deals with. Surely the climate change, the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of Interior, we're doing a lot of policy decision regarding to these areas, and we want them to be relied on a good research and data. And I believe that our part as the Ministry of Science and Technology is to be the enabler for them through IIASA to make a policy which is relies on data and research, because this is what will make the policy a good policy, which will help us as humanity to do better with our Earth. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Itai, for taking this role and represent Israel in this very important organization. And thank you, Rami, from my ministry, to collaborate all this work with IIASA. I'm sure that you'll do a great job for the next years to come. And I think that you all should be very thankful for Rami working very hard, so the government will take this decision to be a part of this organization for the next 5 years. You all know that in the political situation in Israel now, it's hard to take decisions, and it doesn't matter what the decision is. So it's a great achievement for you and for the ministry because of your hard work, and I would like to thank you for that. Thank you all. Have a very interesting evening and tomorrow, and thank you, Itai, again.
Thank you very much, Hilla. You stole my words. I wanted to thank Rami because Rami has been serving the new secretary of the committee for the collaboration between IIASA and Israel, and has done a tremendous job. I've followed it very closely because he kept screaming at me that I'm not doing my job. So I know what it takes to kind of get Rami on your wrong side. So thank you, Rami, for keeping me honest, as I keep saying. Thank you, Hilla, very much for coming and for your nice and kind words. Thank you, the ambassador. I would like to invite Albert to say some words and introduce Wolfgang Lutz as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Itai. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful for us from IIASA to be able to share with you some of the work that we're doing, and of course, nobody better than Wolfgang Lutz to open the show. This particular occasion, of course, as we heard earlier, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary as an institution, but it's also important to emphasize that beyond the role that IIASA plays as a research institution looking at global matters of our common interest, IIASA also plays a very important role by virtue of the way it was established in the 1970s as a bridge-building organization between communities at odds, communities that were in conflict at that point in time through the Cold War, that we continue as IIASA to play that science diplomacy role as an institution. In other words, building bridges between communities, building bridges between nation states, to focus collectively on matters of common interest and issues that matters that they share. As we heard earlier, the issue of sustainability is one of those challenges that none of us are going to solve unilaterally. It requires multilateral cooperation in order for us to achieve these problems, or to solve these problems and deal with these matters. And so it's part of the agenda of IIASA is to bring parties together from a research perspective to work together on these common problems that we share. I just wanted to also, because it's our 50th anniversary, share a short video with you, if I may, that we've wanted to just open up. I'm going to ask Sergey to just do that. Thank you.
Political divides is needed now more than ever. IIASA research continues to use the power of systems analysis to bring together scientists from around the globe to find holistic solutions to issues of global concern. The Institute's 50th anniversary provides a perfect moment to take stock of its achievements as we look to the future.
if I should choose one word, I would say change maker.
Bridge building.
Surprising.
Global, path-breaking and comprehensive.
Network.
Excellence.
Complex.
Vital.
IIASA as an institution represents some 56 countries, and we really are getting to the point where we have a truly global reach in terms of both the staff complement, the skills that they bring to the institution, and therefore the potential scientific advice that we can offer to people right around the world.
IIASA has an incredibly interesting history. It was founded 1972, 50 years ago. It is an institute that is unique, importantly, that it's not subject to any national political agenda.
It's been the product of science diplomacy, and that's what is, in fact, also written into the kind of genetic code of IIASA. And in these days, what more would we need than science diplomacy?
We are an international research organization, and I think one of our main assets are the national member organizations around the world, and that we can, through systems analysis and to a more integrated approach to different world problems, build a bridge between different countries and also build a scientific bridge and provide information as a basis to have discussions.
System science brings together different aspects, different processes, different actors, in order to get a more holistic picture of a certain research question or a policy concern.
We tackle a very complex issue in an integrated way. We approach from the social science, natural science, mathematical science, and also technological science. I would say that we're starting always from problem, then working towards the solutions.
We are doing this science for a better life, so we bridge the gap between science and policy, and this interaction between science and policy is very important.
We got to talk not only with scientists, but also with policymakers, with practitioners, with NGOs. So you got different options, like different directions to do research.
Science has global standards. Scientists around the world essentially speak the same language. And there is no other community in the world that does it. So it's a very powerful force for improving the human condition. Through that function, it really greatly contributes to the benefit of humankind, to the further advance of human well-being on this planet.
I think it would be key to increase or keep the systemic approach to the global challenges that we have, because we see more and more that the interconnections that exist between the different challenges are becoming more important, whether it has to do with climate change, with conflicts, with migration, health shocks, issues of justice.
The world currently has many challenges, and we know that scientific insights are necessary, but not sufficient. So what we actually really need is to foster public engagement through participatory approaches to science. For example, citizen science or participatory-driven science, where society and scientists work together to develop common solutions.
This is the science that we need in the 21st century in order to facilitate sustainable development, in order to bring prosperity to all parts of the world. I think science really has a crucial role to play.
Everybody should be delighted that the IIASA is turning 50. I think the fact that the IIASA has been around for that long and has made a significant impact already at the global community in terms of its policy work. The heydays from the 70s, from the acid rain research, to today where we're influencing significantly the climate conversations, the biodiversity conversations that are happening. These things are critical to ensure that we have a dignified future for humanity.
A systems approach begins when first you see the world through the eyes of another.
There we go. Thank you very much for that. From my side, then, I'd like to conclude by saying thank you, Excellency, for joining us. Thank you for the university leadership that has joined us. Thank you for the policy-making leadership that has joined us. We really appreciate the fact that you've come out to listen to our IIASA message and help us to strengthen the relationship between IIASA and Israeli science generally. So we're going to ask our colleague and friend Wolfgang Lutz, who is now the Deputy Director General for Science at IIASA, to give you a little bit of an insight into one of the 6 programs that we have at IIASA in terms of our work. And he's going to be focusing on population issues and give you a background about what IIASA has been doing in this space over the last couple of decades, I guess, to give you a broad sweeping view. But Wolfgang, we're all looking forward to your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you.
Yes, good evening, Herr Botschafter, High Representatives of Tel Aviv University, as well as the government of Israel. It's a great pleasure to speak to you this evening. All right, well, you see the title here, the Systems Analysis of Population Development and Environment Interactions. Now, how do I move on the slides with this? Okay. You've already seen the outline. It was, by some mistake, it was on the screen all the time, so I'm not going to go through it. I will start right with the notion that is sort of a new notion that is now very popular. We're living in times of polycrisis because of many interacting crises. First of all, there is, and this was very much highlighted in the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh just recently, the climate crisis, and we may not be far away from a tipping point on that. Biodiversity crisis is probably less known, but there are some scientists say that it may be even still more serious for the future human life support systems on our planet, and we'll talk about biodiversity extensively tomorrow. Then, of course, there is the COVID crisis, but there are possibly other, even more serious looming pandemic crises. Some epidemiology experts say that COVID we still may have been lucky with it. It may have been rather mild as compared to other possible pandemics. Food security, a big issue half a century or throughout human history, actually, is still with us. It's not yet fully resolved. Also, theoretically, there's enough food for everybody. There is increasing inequality within societies, not only economic income inequality, also education in terms of rights in civil society. There are many indicators. Increasing political polarization can be observed within countries as well as geopolitically. We're seeing trade wars and possibly a looming new Cold War between the US and China this time, possibly. And then we have the vulnerability of current institutions to cope with new challenges, for instance, migration that is induced by environmental change, both within regions and across regions. This is something our current global system is not good in dealing with. And you can see many more challenges and think of them. Okay. Have to roll it down. Yes, 50 years ago, this was sort of a shocking report in 1972 when the Club of Rome published the limits to growth. It coincided with the establishment of IIASA in 72. And you see here some of the curves that were published. You see sort of the population increasing, you see industrial output increasing, you saw pollution increasing, and the resources, which at the time was mostly considered to be oil, on a declining trajectory. As well as food first increasing, and then just around the time now, and depending on how you parameterize the model, it was either in 2020 or 23 or 25 that the big collapse was predicted. For instance, for population, the decline, they assumed that population would peak and then decline, not because of voluntary family planning and lower fertility. No, it would decline because there would be massive increases in the death rate, in mortality, due to a massive food problem, starvation, massive pollution. So this was really a disaster scenario. And it's remarkable because it's for the first time that really a systemic approach where these different things that so far had been studied
in separation were pulled together in a very simple model, and almost all the numerical predictions were outright wrong. But what was new and what is still surviving to this day is the idea that these things are interconnected and depend on each other. And it was, of course, IIASA, which was established in '72, that for the first 10 years, IIASA was the global center of global modeling. There were many other global models following this limits to growth model. And IIASA had its own group there, a very prominent group, was headed by Donella Meadows, one of the co-authors of the limits to growth. And and in '82 there was a IIASA book published, the first lessons learned from the first decade of global modeling. It was called Groping in the Dark, saying essentially we know very little about the future, but we have to try to say whatever we be able to say. And then it's interesting, after this first decade, there was never a book on the second or third decade, because global modeling came out of fashion. Everywhere, as well as we at IIASA, understood that these highly aggregate, sort of superficial models that try to link everything with everything are not good enough. We need much more detailed analysis, and so that's why all the research groups that existed at IIASA, from energy to air pollution to land use and biodiversity, developed their own very strong, powerful models, such as the message model, the Globiome, or the Gaines model. But they, by tendency, were sort of sectoral models. They captured maybe several disciplines, but they did not capture the entire circle. They did not capture everything from the human population to our life support systems. And that's why now we see a new need to bring these things together. And at the very end, we'll give you an outlook, because in the real world, of course, these things depend from each other. And it's just a difficult balance to have are comprehensive enough, but still have enough detailed, spatial detail and other disciplinary detail to be credible and to really capture the most important aspects. So these are the IIASA research programs as we have them today, and you've already heard the leaders of the different research programs speaking in this movie that you just saw. We start on there with biodiversity and natural resources, sort of our natural basis for life on Earth, then the advancing systems analysis, and each of these programs then has 4 research groups that you can all find on the IIASA website. Then there is energy, climate, and environment. And then we have the population and just societies, and as Albert had mentioned, for 25 years I had the opportunity of heading what was then called the World Population Program of IIASA. But even there we always interacted with the other groups at IIASA. So today I will not give just a specific demographic perspective, but I will really try to give the more comprehensive picture of this population development environment interactions. But you probably see that it sort of comes from a background of demography. And then we have strategic initiatives, which are a very new initiative of IIASA to work together with our national member organizations and some young scholars at IIASA, and sort of the member organizations are really actively involved in defining which these projects, what the topics of these projects should be. And then we have a brand new project at IIASA, a program at IIASA called Economic Frontiers. All right, there are many ways of defining systems analysis, and I'll give you some more narrative definitions later, but this is sort of a picture that tries to show essentially, if we want to understand this system of an element, it's sort of a living organism. And then you see you may see there are some scientists from different disciplines. They are only interested in specific elements, specific parts of this elephant, and they have their own theories about what it is and how it should be modeled and how it should be understood. But even taking what these people have in their minds, putting together, you never come up with an elephant. You really need to bring these people together, and that's what systems analysis tries to do. And it was already mentioned, I mean, we do this really in the context of the Global Sustainable Development Goals that we will discuss in more detail. Later, it was also that the development goals were established in 2015, and at that point, the General Assembly also decided there needs to be a follow-up process by the scientific community, which is completely independent of governments. And actually, this was the highest level ever independent UN commission. This group of 15 scientists invited to produce the Global Sustainable Development Report, and I was invited to be one of these 15 people, and we took this task very serious. Every 4 years, the General Assembly is expecting such a report. Right now, a different team is working on the 23 report, monitoring the progress essentially, but also looking more broadly at how are we moving forward. And yes, I'll just show you now 2 slides from this. This is sort of the one big contradiction that we see is where we have on the one axis sort of the biophysical boundaries that we aggress, the harm that we do to our planet, to the environment on the horizontal axis. And then on the vertical axis, you have a social threshold achieved. This comes from a paper from O'Neill and others. And what you see here is that what we, of course, want to do, we all want to should move to the upper left corner, having high social development with minimal impact on the environment of our planet. But what happens in reality is that countries are moving outside. Either they are at the bottom left. These are essentially poor developing countries who have low social development and also have little impact on the environment so far. And then you have the ones that succeeded in social development, but they tend to have very high impact on the environment. Also, not every country is equal. You see some like the United States being up there in the upper right corner, others like Israel, for instance, here, or Korea, or Japan and Germany are at an equal level of social development, but have a little less harm on the environment. But the difficult target really is to move up there jointly to this upper left corner. Okay, since this was a group of scientists, and we are also here in science, we have several what we call calls for action, to action in this report. And with respect to science, here what the world map shows you here, how unequally science is distributed over the world. It's really heavily concentrated in Europe, North America, and then China, Korea, Japan to some extent, Israel you see also quite prominently here. Russia is visible, and then in South Africa, but otherwise there isn't really, there are some parts of the world that have very little of this science, and the color really shows you what is the government-funded, sort of blue is government-funded, and red is private-funded science. And we have some requests here, some calls for changes in the system, particularly a stronger focus on mission-oriented research. Of course, not replacing basic research, but just adding it on. And also assessment of the existing knowledge that we have about transformation processes, how to adapt also the scientific funding schemes to be more open to inter- and transdisciplinary research, and how to provide the right incentives. So these are some of the issues that relate to science funding. Now, IIASA had 10 years ago, at its first year's birthday, also a conference, and there one of the topics was this notion of sustainability science. You know, this is seen as a sort of a special kind of science. If you look at read the PNAS, the Proceedings of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, they have a special section on sustainability sciences, and also the U.S. National Academy of Sciences has this group on human environment, where I also happen to help them in sort of defining what is meant by sustainability science. And one of the most prominent representatives of this group, Bill Clark at Harvard University, who, by the way, also worked for many years at IIASA and shaped some of the IIASA research in the 1980s, put up at the IIASA conference this equation, where the well-being of a population, a certain population at time t, is a function of certain capitals, in particular the manufactured capital, the human capital, and the natural capital. Then I standing for institutions, and K standing for knowledge. Well, it would be nice if the solution to the well-being of humanity could be captured in such a nice formula. And actually, that's what the sustainability science tried to do over time. And there has been very important work on how these different capitals interact and how they are strengthened or weakened. And much work has been invested into the notion of inclusive wealth and capital. Partha Gupta has made important contributions, and he's also been involved in some of our work in IIASA. But most of the analysis, scientific efforts have gone to the right-hand side, trying to look at this function. And very few people have attempted to specifically quantitatively measure the left-hand side. How do we measure? How do we capture well-being? It's just a goal to improve the well-being for the most people, but how could it be measured? So this has been an ambitious recent IIASA project, recognizing that what Donella Meadows, in one of her books on systems analysis, wrote, that we really have to draw a difference between what is the ultimate end, so what we are after in the end, what is sort of the end that we are aiming for, and what are intermediate ends, like important steps on the way there. So the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, with their 169 more specific targets, they are clearly mostly intermediate ends. They are very important steps, implying policy changes to come closer to long-term sustainable well-being. And then, of course, there have been even more than targets, more than 210, some counts as 240, or how many official indicators, and hundreds of less official indicators. Now, in this Commission on Global Sustainable Development report, we tried hard to see the big picture, to see the wood for the trees. And that's difficult when there are so many different aspects and so many indicators to be considered. So what we recently tried is come up with a specific, tailor-made indicator that should be just one indicator, because there seems to be a clear need for one well-being indicator that then can serve as a point of comparison across population groups and across time, to be used as a sustainability criterion. And as you see, we published this last year under this name, Years of Good Life. And in this paper, we also, there are lots and lots of different proposals for well-being indicators, each of them highlighting different aspects and combining them with different weighting schemes, and we review many of them in this paper. But I think we really have to step back. And at IIASA, actually, we do also have a few philosophers, so they are not a very big group, and we also need to inspire. And here, it's worth stepping back a bit, and we can go back to Aristoteles, not so far from here in Asia Minor, writing, what is the ultimate purpose of human existence? He wrote in his Nicomachean Ethics, what is the end or goal for which we should direct all our activities? That's exactly the similar question that we are still asking today. And his answer was oidaimonia, a Greek word that is difficult to translate. There are several translations. One is life satisfaction, or happiness, or best even a fulfilled life, or simply a good life. Centuries later, there was also Thomas More in England, who wrote about utopia, a fictional egalitarian society and its values, where the most fundamental value, he claimed, is life itself, followed by happiness. So there's a clear hierarchy. We should be alive and we should be happy. Still centuries later, in the 20th century, Manfred Max Neef was very influential in his focus on the basic needs approach, that this is like meeting the basic needs of all has higher priority than making the rich richer, or people above this minimum level still more wealthy. And he also considered the social groups and the environment. But he also said of all things they seem to be equally important, but the most important really is to remain alive. And finally, our international development systems, this notion, the capabilities approach associated with the names of Amartya Sen and the philosopher Martha Nussbaum, has become most influential. And they actually all write that sort of being alive, not dying prematurely, or before one's life is reduced to not worth living, that is one of the key targets and hopes. So what are the criteria? I mean, we are really sort of looking for something that is valid for all of humanity, and really something that is acceptable to these 5 people you see here, really from a Wall Street broker to a Buddhist monk. And actually we're having focus groups in many cultures around the world to test this, whether avoiding premature death of yourself or the people you care about is really higher in the hierarchy and sort of the most important. But next, of course, we understand it's mere survival is not good enough. We want to survive in an acceptable condition. It also needs to be broken down into subpopulations, so it needs to be based on individual characteristics, which, for instance, the Human Development Index does not allow. It's based on national accounting. We don't want to base it on national accounting, but we want to have it separate for men and women. We want to have it separate for different ethnic groups or other subpopulations of interest. Then it should be comparable over time and across subpopulations. It should not include implicit trade-off assumptions or arbitrary weighting schemes and other such criteria that we don't have time now to go into it, but we then sort of constructed something that should meet all these criteria. And when trying to do this, we really met, in the whole field of well-being analysis, there are 2 schools that are vigorously opposed to each other. There's the ones who believe that only subjective indicators, subjective quality of life is what matters. And it's, the argument is that what matters is how you perceive your quality of life. And then there is this other school that believes only in objective indicators. They say, well, your perception may be biased, you may be happy in the morning and unhappy in the evening, also your life hasn't changed, and so they focus on the being out of absolute poverty, being free from physical and cognitive limitations. These are essentially the 3 capabilities that also into the Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum framework enter the Human Development Index. So what we are saying now in this Years of Good Life is that most important is a year being alive, but this year is only counted as a good year if you are above a minimum threshold, thus taking a sort of this basic needs approach in this poverty, physical and cognitive health dimensions, and you are above a minimum threshold on life satisfaction. There are people are asking, like, on life satisfaction from 0 to 10, and we say that if you are above 3, then this is sort of acceptable. If you are below 3, you are so unhappy, unsatisfied with your life that it's not being counted. And then we decompose this for many countries in the world and estimate it with existing data. Here you just see for India and Mexico. So just interestingly, is this cursor working? No, it's not working. You see sort of the overall life expectancy that's in the top for Indian women here increased from 51 to 54, whereas the yoga, the years of good life, increased from only 15 to 23 years, assessed at the age of 20, because for below 20 years old, you cannot meaningfully ask for their life satisfaction. So we do list the remaining life expectancy at the age of 20. And you see what pushed it upwards was, on the one hand, out of poverty between the late 95 to 2000, and then 2010 to 15. There was big progress in poverty reduction in India, less progress in education, and as you see on the cognitive side, women were more stagnant. Interest on the right-hand side, you see South Africa, where life expectancy actually decreased a bit because of the AIDS pandemic, and health also went down. But the yoga, the years of good life altogether, increased somewhat from 19 to 24 years because on some of these other dimensions like life satisfaction or being out of poverty, things have gone better, and they have to, for men as well. And then if we have this for elderly populations, and here you already see this for different European countries now. Of course, data are difficult to find. Here you have the share. This is the survey for health, aging, and retirement in Europe. That have all the ingredients of this indicator assessed for representative samples. And we have it for different education groups. And you see that in every country, actually the more educated women, in this case, have a higher years of good life as well as a higher total life expectancy. Okay, let's move on. We've re-estimated this for all countries in the world, how it's based on some rather strong assumptions, how these years of good life increased. There's only these red lines. This is in sub-Saharan Africa. We saw some significant declines in the 90s, again, due to the AIDS pandemic. And well, the question is now, how will this continue in the future when we then even try to factor in feedbacks from environmental change or other issues? Now let's go to the next level and talk about sort of the determinants. Here you see a picture that has been most influential. It's called the Preston curve. Actually, it's been done by Sam Preston, a demographer at the University of Pennsylvania, who happens to be my teacher also in the methods of demography when I was doing my PhD there. And he, very early in his career, published this paper, very simple. You have constant US dollars per person, GDP per capita at the horizontal axis, and then life expectancy in different time periods. So he had a few data points for around 1900, and then the upper, sort of the round ones showed it for the 1930s, and the squares for the 1960s, and he fitted curves. And there are sort of two very clear features. The first is that you have diminishing returns, sort of after a certain income level is reached, more income does not give you higher life expectancy, is not associated with higher life expectancy. And the other thing is that, however, at a given level of income, the curve has shifted upwards. And this was widely interpreted as the medical progress. So for a given dollar, you now can buy a longer life because of medical progress. This seemed to be intuitive, and somehow all economists and everybody believed, yes, of course it is money that drives these things. Well, in a recent paper, we compared it to a possible other candidate. So we revisited the Preston curve, and on the right-hand side, you see the Preston curve with more recent data. The red line gives you the 1970s, the green one the 1990, and the blue one 2010. And you see exactly the same pattern. You see this diminishing, this leveling off, diminishing returns, and you see the unexplained upward shift over time. But if instead of income, on the left-hand side, we take mean years of schooling of the population, which is sort of the average education they got, wow, the picture is very different. Now it's almost straight lines. It's diminishing a little, but still at very high levels of education. More education is still associated with higher life expectancy. And interestingly, there's no shift over time. So we did this, of course, complex statistical modeling here as well, but really concluded that education is more important than income when it comes to life expectancy. But those of you who are working in social sciences, of course, know that there's a lot of endogeneity, how economists call it. Some people claim that health also impacts on the income, others that income impacts on health, and then there are others that health impacts on education. Yes, children need to be of a certain health to be able to go to school, and also health is important for economic growth and income. So they are all very closely related. How can we ever solve the causal structure behind this? Well, here demographic modeling offers us a unique opportunity because what matters is the adult educational attainment. Like when it comes to the health of 70-year-old people, it is the educational attainment of those 70-year-old people that matters. It's not, and this is quite caused by when they went to school 50 or more years earlier. So the school enrollment, which is indeed impacted by income and health at the time of the schooling when it takes place, then results with a great time lag in adult educational attainment. And this time lag where sort of the current income cannot possibly impact on the current educational attainment. That helps us to sort out the causality here. And after extensive reviews and everything, we came up with this IIASA policy report with this strong statement: when it comes to survival, mind matters more than money. So what is in your mind is more important than what is in your pocket. By the way, we find this for many other important things of life, and just not only for survival. Health, for instance, you see here, this is just the Austrian health survey, some data where we see, of course, the indicators. This is the disability in limitations in daily life activities. Of course, they always increase with age. Older people have more physical limitations. But you see also a very strong educational gradient. This is sort of the Austrian education system, but you see that those who have the only compulsory education, the red line, women in this case at the age of 75, they are twice as likely to have this activity limitation, to be disabled, than women at the same age with a post-secondary or university education. How will life expectancy continue? This is one of the most controversial discussions in demography, which of course also matters for our well-being indicator. That's why I'm putting it here. Jim Voppel, who is the author of this, and he was the Max Planck, founding director of the Max Planck Institute for Demography, who, by the way, also was for many years at IIASA and wrote, "It was at IIASA that I became a demographer." He was there in the 70s and 80s. He published this in Science, which is sort of amazing. You see here the countries plotted that at a given year, that is stated at the bottom, had the world's highest life expectancy. So in the 1850s, 60s, this was Norway. Then New Zealand took over. Then Norway took over again, these green dots. And then for a few years, it was Iceland. And now it's continuously Japan that has the world's highest life expectancy. And what these horizontal lines tell you is when the different population projections, mostly the UN population projections, in the past thought that would be the maximum life expectancy that could ever be reached by any country in the world. So in the 1920s, they assumed that it was 65. No country would ever have a life expectancy higher than 65. And then as some countries already reached it, they moved this up to 70, then 75. And you see these red dotted lines, the UN still assume that it is leveling off. And this is a heated debate, we don't know. The recent COVID pandemic has in some countries, of course, led to a decline in life expectancy by 2 or 3 years, in some even less, in some only half a year. But we see it recovering again, and there are indications in the hope that it will sort of come up to the previous trajectory, that COVID was really just a one-time shock, and there will be a resilience in the system so that we would recover and even continue growing on the previous path. But this remains to be seen and depends a bit on how long COVID turns out to be, how dangerous. Now to the final part where we want to look how does the human population interact with the natural environment. I should say that at IIASA also we had in 2001 the first book ever published on the topic population and climate change. At that time, the topic didn't interest so many people. Now this week, later this week in Vienna, we have a conference on population and climate change, and we have 500 registered participants. It just shows how this topic of climate change for population scientists as well as population for climate scientists became more important. And what is important here, sort of, that the human population matters both for the greenhouse gas emissions, our consumption, but also our technologies to improve the efficiency of energy use. And so this both together has the mitigation side. And then what has been now increasingly important and what also sort of was a hot topic at the Sharm el-Sheikh conference to be discussed is the adaptation. How will populations, how will societies be able to cope with already unavoidable change in the climate system? And again here, not all people will be equally affected. And this is very important. It's of course not all regions will be equally affected, but even within a given region, a spatial unit, not all people will be equally affected. There are demographic differentials by age, and as we'll show also by level of education and other issues. So this has really given the framework for this concept of the shared socioeconomic pathways, or SSPs, as we've developed them at IIASA as a collaboration between many programs at IIASA, really that sort of maps up on the one axis, the socioeconomic challenges for mitigation, and on the other axis, the socioeconomic challenges for adaptation. So, and the diagonal gives you on the left-hand corner sort of sustainability, highly developed green societies, that's where we want to be, and on the upper right corner is where we don't want to be, but there's also the off-diagonal where some countries maybe have great challenges for adaptation, but not so much for mitigation. Yes, and by the way, these SSP scenarios, if you look to the last IPCC report, they are just cited all over the place. This is an input by IIASA together with some partners. Of course, IIASA didn't do the line alone, but IIASA now also in June had this scenario forum where the whole scenario community, the SSP community, came together again. And it's really been extremely influential in our assessments of climate change. Well, we don't have time now, but this what they call the demographic metabolism model shows that how societies change through cohort replacement. And that is a way of forecasting society's adaptive capacity to climate change. So the question is really here, the climate of the future we are modeling with climate models, but how will the society of the future look like when it will meet the changing climate? And this has been a big challenge. Many organizations have just used today's populations and societies and match it with the climate of the future, which makes no sense, of course. Now, you see here, just for the Republic of Korea, this multidimensional approach, and I will talk much more about this tomorrow. This is where you not only have the age pyramid by age and sex, women on the right, men on the left, but also color gives you level of education. Like Korea used to be very low educated. Red means never in school, and blue means secondary, and dark blue tertiary education. So in 1980, you see this massive inter-cohort difference. So the young cohorts were already well educated, but the older ones essentially were uneducated, particularly women, because when they were at school age, they didn't have an opportunity to go to school. And given this, we can just follow how Korea today has the highest education, together with Singapore, of the young cohorts. Almost half of the young people have post-secondary education, but still you see some red and yellow at the top because these elderly are still around, and it just takes the demographic metabolism to bring the young cohorts, the better educated, move up the age pyramids, and the older cohorts die. Now you see this in 20-year steps. You see the same cohort can be followed that every 20 years they are 20 years older. And this is really the basis for also projecting population distributions many decades into the future. So in that sense, populations are the most, education is one of the most stable elements for forecasting societal capabilities in the future, because the human life is many decades long today, mostly 70 to 80 years. On average, and we can go that long into the future. Now, Israel, let me just quickly, we have this Explorer, this Wittgenstein Center Data Explorer, where we have age pyramids, and these age pyramids have been taken from the UN estimates, and then we reconstructed the color as being the educational composition. So in 1960, you see an extremely young population, many children, sort of the grayish children below age 50, and you see a relatively low level of education. Some in the middle, the dark red, never had any schooling. Now in 1990, okay, it looks very different, okay? Education has really spread, but you still have people with low or no education, particularly in the older age groups in Israel. We have this for every 5-year steps on the Data Explorer. If you want to look at them, I just copied them. This is Israel today, or in 2020. In the meantime, you already got over 9 million population, and you see the age pyramid still looks like a pyramid. So this is one of the very few countries in the world that combine a rather young age structure with high levels of education. This is due to immigration mostly and to unusually high fertility given the socioeconomic development. And now then we do scenarios for the future. So this is the medium scenario for Israel 2050. Population will increase to 12 to 13 million. And you see education, particularly of the younger, will likely continue much stronger. And so this is sort of a really powerful human capital, human resource for development that Israel is likely to see. Here we see the whole from 1950 to 2060. You see that much of the expansion of the population really has been adding this light blue or dark blue, meaning people with upper secondary or post-secondary education. And of course, still a pretty ever-increasing proportion or number of children below the age of 15. So this is, in the international comparison, really a quite unusual demographic pattern that I hope we can talk more about tomorrow. Let's just compare this to Nigeria. This was in 1950, almost completely uneducated with this classical pyramid, high fertility, completely uneducated women. Nigeria today is still a very young population. It made some progress in education, but still you have a certain proportion at all ages that didn't have a chance for education. And here then we have two alternative scenarios. The rapid development scenario, that sort of Nigeria would enter a very rapid school expansion and would also bring the birth rates down and would level off at somewhere like 300 million, or then would the SSP3 would go very high up to almost 1 billion. So there is really a choice to be made. Nigeria is on a crossroads about its future. And here we see our scenarios for the world, where sort of the most likely middle scenario sees a leveling of around 10 billion. I have to rush because time is running and I have about 5 to 10 more minutes. So this new data by age cohorts of educational distribution really helped us to have a fresh look also at the effect of education on economic growth. And you see here on the right-hand side, on the top, that our finding that complementary primary education with secondary education in broad segments of the population is necessary to give a boost to economic growth for poor countries. And this was in 2008, published in Science at a time when the Millennium Development Goals really went for only universal primary education. That was the goal. There was nothing about secondary education. And we showed that it's necessary. Primary education alone will not do the trick. And now, fortunately, the Sustainable Development Goals of 2014 in their goal 4 state very clearly you need quality primary and secondary education for all girls and boys. Now, talking about systems analysis, the disaster research community so far has always considered income and housing conditions, and so the main determinants of vulnerability to natural disasters. And our hypothesis after the analysis that we've done before is that maybe we should have a look at education as sort of a new variable that wasn't considered in this analysis so far. So with this ERC project I paid the IIASA colleagues who had done this earlier work to go back and to the same households that they had surveyed and collect information about education. And to their surprise, but not to mine, it turned out that education was the single most important determinant in terms of reducing vulnerability. And this also went into these SSPs, as I just showed, that are also by level of education. And we had here also tried to bring this to the international scientific community through a piece in Science, but still it's not yet picked up that indeed education, universal education, is a very important way of enhancing climate adaptation. And the current Green Climate Funds, that is to talk much about that, only for the time being funds engineering projects, sea walls, or some other sort of concrete in both meanings of the word action. And the subtitle here says, fund more educators rather than just engineers, because you empower people to then flexibly react to whatever the challenges are. They are better informed beforehand, they can better prepare, they are know better what to do during the disaster, and they recover more rapidly. Actually, The Economist has also picked this up as a result of system science, or sort of multi-dimensional studies, that climate change is harder on less educated people. Well, let me come to the policy priorities. If we now come to the conclusion that indeed education is such a key driver, the funding, global funding for education really has gone down. Also, we are not alone in stressing the importance. What is one of the priorities is not only the primary and secondary education, but you have to start in very early in life. Early childhood education really has so many benefits. And James Heckman, the Nobel laureate in economics, used to say, like, when children enter school, it's often already too late. I mean, what the main brain function, the building of the synaptic structures, happens at the ages 2, 3, and 4, and that's where you have to boost their cognitive development and help them. So there clearly is needed more focus on early childhood development and, of course, on quality. We recently had another paper in PNAS where we showed that despite of the increases in overall school level, particularly primary education in Africa and so on, this has come partly at the expense of the quality. So we see a rising global gap in the skills. We developed a new indicator there of the literacy, skills in literacy adjusted mean years of schooling. So I think that is also another, so early childhood education and the quality of education really need more emphasis. Coming back to the conclusion, you may have seen that the Club of Rome this year, 50 years after their first report, published another book on the model called Earth for All. And you see the sort of the basic structure of this, which essentially is sort of not so different from what they did 50 years ago. For instance, here they have not learned some of the experience that I was just talking about. For instance, education is not in the model there, and some other important things are missing. So that's why we at IIASA, if I can give you sort of a glimpse what we are now working on this year, we want to come up with a new flagship report that has the tentative title, Systems Analysis for Boosting Resilient Well-Being, where we try to do also sort of a reduced form model, how this is called, not these very detailed, in-depth models that we already have, like gains or message and so on, but have a truly comprehensive model and capture the most important ways how they interact. And here we do have an education module because we've learned this lesson, and we also do have, as you see, biodiversity and language. It builds on an already partly existing IIASA model. So that is the challenge, bringing all the pieces together again. So I promised you in the conclusion that we'll try to also give a narrative definition of what we mean by systems analysis. Like I tried to illustrate it with sort of getting indicators such as education that first do not seem to be a key element of global climate change, for instance, but see how they broaden the picture and actually can help us to get a more accurate and more comprehensive understanding. And then there is this policy dimension, and this is Lynn Hordijk, one of our former IIASA directors, who said that the purpose of systems analysis is to help decision makers and public policy makers to address the problems they are facing in the short, medium, and long run. And we need, of course, science, we need models, but it is more than modeling. It is systems analysis is not just a branch of applied mathematics. And then just the justification for IIASA is also in the words of Lynn Hordijk. At IIASA, we study problems that are too complex to be resolved by either a single discipline or a single nation or even a single generation. It is for which we do need international collaboration and cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
We would allow for a couple of questions before we move on to our light dinner. Anyone who wants to raise? Yes.
So, in a One thing that comes into mind when you show the optimistic story of Israel is that we Israelis know that there are some question marks on the quality of education.
Yeah.
We have populations that what you see in the statistics of primary education and even secondary is not satisfactory in any way. We have different streams. Is there any thoughts on taking into account also the quality of the educational system?
Yes, very much so. As I tried to show at the very last slide, but it was really very quickly going, that we have developed also these new indicators, which is not just the formal educational attainment or the mean years of schooling, but also the skills in literacy tested mean years of schooling, which is the OECD. They did these PISA studies, but the PISA studies are only tests of skills in mathematics, reading, and so on, for students at the age of 15. Some institutions like the World Bank uses this data to make assumptions about the quality of education of the entire age range. But of course, the quality may change over time. So now we do have some newer data where you have sort of PISA-like tests for samples of the adult population. So we have adults from 15 to up to 75 tested. They get a simple sentence and they have to read it and in their whatever their preferred language is, and then they are asked questions about this to test whether it's been understood. And this now also allows us to distinguish, for instance, in the case of Israel, you could do it by distinguishing between those who had their schooling in Israel or who were migrants who were schooled in a different part of the world and then came to Israel, and you can then study how the literacy skills, even at an equal level of formal education, could be different. So this adult testing of literacy skills really opens up a lot of possible analysis once you subdivide the sample into different groups.
Thank you. Maybe you were, if I may just add, so there's the PIAC test,
PIAC,
which is perhaps
that's what I meant.
What you meant, yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I'm very biased because a lot of my work has to do with education and health as well. So I'm very much leaning toward your message, but I'd like to challenge you a little bit. And this goes back to a point that Richard Easterlin made decades ago. And when we think about education, it's a marker of it's an individual attribute, but it's also a marker of the aggregate human capital in society and the institutions that made it possible to acquire education, tertiary education for sure. So I wonder, how do you basically tease out the individual level effects from the societal effects of having a society that allows that level of education to so many people, rather than just merely the individual attribute?
Yeah, well, this is a very good point. And by the way, Richard Easterlin also happened to be my teacher in population economics, and he did so many important contributions also on the happiness research. And just a footnote before I answer your question, when I sent him a draft, he's now well above 90, of this paper on the years of good life, he said, "Wolfgang, I should warn you, I will never say anything positive about a paper that does not exclusively look at sort of personal happiness scores." So he dislikes the objective indicators and he only wants the subjective indicators. At least at his old age, he has a very strong view. Now, to your point, yes, I mean, there are clearly individual level effects and community level effects. And like for health, as you just said, also it's not only your individual health-related behavior, whether you have a healthy lifestyle or whether you see the symptoms correctly and in time and go to the doctor, but it also depends on the quality of the health system around you, and that is a function of the proportion of the population that is educated in society. Of course, money also matters, but I tend, again, the proportion with higher educations is more the driver, as I showed, for the economic growth than the other way around. It's, I mean, this is a complex relationship. It's at the higher level of the higher end of education. Of course, when we talk about tertiary education, which is rather costly, then of course economic growth matters and the level of income. But particularly when you go for primary universal literacy and so, then economic growth is less a driver of this, but the other way around, the increasing literacy is a driver of economic growth. But yes, to answer your initial question, it matters both the community level and the individual level, and they interact with each other.
Thank you. You brought to life the importance of education generally. You also mentioned the importance of early stage education.
Yeah.
And we find that fascinating also because it's one of the policies that we try to deal with in Israel now with the elections and everything. We're an interesting country. We have some people, we have very diverse and they have different ideologies. Would you say that early life education would be as important also to people that later on may, for ideological reasons, not want to continue that education in a more Western way?
Well, I think this is the building of synapses in the brains of the child that connects things and that can judge things, that results in increasing capabilities for doing abstract reasoning, abstract thinking, or moving geometrical patterns around. I mean, these are all these tests that are being done with children. That is, of course, independent on whatever the person, when he grows up later, chooses to do. I mean, they are just basic cognitive skills that are enhanced. And the question is more sort of an ideological. We have it also in Europe, that there is the widely spread attitude that early childhood education is a matter for the parents. They should look at it, and only then when the child goes to kindergarten, or then to school, that is when the public kicks in. And of course, this is also a reason for what we call the inheritance of poor education, because if the parents themselves have a poor education and don't really know how to help the child in their cognitive development. I mean, it's simple things like looking at picture books together and reading those. I mean, in many families, this simply doesn't happen, and there's a big education gradient in this. So there is an interesting example. This is Finland, where for some reasons they already in the 1930s, but then after World War II, established something they called neuvola, which is for newborn children not only a medical check that you have in many countries, but a constant, every few months, visit to social workers, child psychologists, advising the parents, and investing really a lot in the early childhood development. That has no other country in the world done to that extent. And one of the hypotheses that's worth testing, that the fact that, for instance, Finland was winning the PISA studies one year after the other, and everybody was only looking to the school system, but there's nothing so specific about the school system. One hypothesis is this is due to this neurolar system. They are doing so well because early in their life they got this booster, this enhancement. And for all social strata, it's the rich as well as the poor, and the educated as well as uneducated parents go to these neurolar system services.